In this demonstration of the valuation of an FRA, we are going to be using these set of circumstances at the bottom of the screen. We are going to value a 2x5 FRA 1 month after inception date, given that the original 2x5 fixed rate is 6%, and at valuation date T1, that a new 1x4 FRA is priced at 7.1% and 4-month spot JIBAR is 6.5%. As usual, when dealing with the valuation of a derivative, it is convenient and appropriate to anchor ourselves from the point of view of the long, knowing that whatever the short position is will be equal but opposite to the calculated long value. The 2x5, the original 2x5 FRA, let us just be clear that we understand that from T0's point of view refers to the period labeled in green, starting at month 2 and ending at month 5, that the expiration of the original 2x5 FRA is at month 2, and the maturity date for the notional accrual period is 3 months after that at month 5. The significance of the 1x4 FRA at month 1 is that it is selected as an appropriate valuation reference because it has exactly the same accrual period. If we are now standing at month 1, a 1x4 FRA expires at that point in time, 1 month after our new point of reference, and it matures at that point in time, which is 4 months after our new reference point. And that is the significance of the 1x4. Let us return to the original 2x5 FRA and focus on the fixed rate set in that particular FRA. That fixed rate, we know, specifies from the long's point of view that there will be remember that the long receives floating and pays fixed, and that those payments are calculated with reference to an accrual period, which in this case is the 3 months between months 2 and 5 from the original FRA's point of view, and also with reference to a notional deposit. Now I'm going to do an on-the-go repair here because the facts of the situation omitted a crucial piece of data, and that is that the notional deposit in this example is 10 million rand. Now that we have an accrual period, a notional deposit, and an interest rate, we can determine that at month 5, there will, with certainty, be a payment by the long of that fixed rate set at 6%. And we can do our usual simple interest calculations to determine that that fixed payment is going to be, for the long, is 10 million times. Now, we remember that the fixed rate applies and that it is the accrual period, the period for which the interest accumulates is 3 months. In this situation, 90 over 360. And that allows us to calculate that the payment by the long is going to be 150,000 rand. What about the float? That might be a problem because we, after all, at this point T0 or at T1 have absolutely no idea what the floating spot rate is going to be at the beginning of the accrual period. So we will hold our nerve about that problem and just say to ourselves, fair enough, there will be some kind of receipt and we don't know how much it is. Let's see if that's going to be a problem, because we can't, of course, look into the future. We cannot know what that highly volatile floating rate is going to be either at this point in time 2 months later or at this point in time 1 month later. So far, so good. Now we turn attention to our valuation date T1. And the principle here, the key insight in valuing a derivative, is that we need to imagine, we don't actually do this, but we need to imagine that we are closing out that derivative. And pretty much the standard principle for most derivatives is that in order to close it out, you take an equal but opposite position. So if we were the long, which is our natural point of view when we do a valuation, we imagine, we don't actually do it, we imagine a notional exercise, a what-if exercise of saying 1 month later, what would happen if we took out a short FRA position? What would the situation be there? Well, we can work out, we still have the same 3-month accrual period, we still have the same notional deposit, and this time we have a new interest rate, a new fixed rate, which will apply at the end of the accrual period. And we can do some calculations here. 10 million notional, unchanged. We have a new fixed rate, the same accrual period, allowing us to determine. Now we need to be careful here. We flipped the tables, and the short is going to be the fixed rate receiver. And that calculation is and the short will be the floating rate payer. Now that returns us to exactly the same apparent problem that we had a moment ago of now standing at this date and not being able to know what the floating rate will be at the beginning of the accrual period. But of course, that rate that the short will be paying as the float will be exactly the same rate as the long will be receiving as the float on that date, which means that we don't need to have the ability to time travel, get in a time machine and see what's going to be happening 1 month later, because the floating legs cancel each other out. Why do they cancel each other out? Because the valuation exercise involves us taking an equal but opposite position. We started as a long. We now, in order to value, imagine what would happen if we were to close out, and closing out is achieved by taking out a short, which has the same expiration date, the same maturity date, and the same notional deposit amount. And that allows us to calculate that the position here has a value at month 5. I want to stress the point that these calculations here are applicable as usual, the way interest works at the end of the period, and we have a plus 27,500 amount at T5. Now, in terms of FRA settlement, we are familiar with the concept that we need to, because it is convenient and it is practice that FRA settle in advance, that we need to do a present value calculation and bring that to the beginning of the accrual period. But that won't work here. We need to bring this amount back not to the beginning of the accrual period, but back to valuation date. And that is not 3 months back from month 5, but 4 months back from month 5 to month 1, which is valuation date. The same principle applies in doing as we would do for an FRA settlement calculation, that we hunt and we determine what the spot floating rate, JIBAR in this case, is at the beginning of that particular period. And we have been supplied with a 6.5%, I'm at the bottom of the screen, a 6.5% rate applicable to a 4-month fixed deposit maturing. If you started month 1, a 4-month fixed deposit would mature at time 5, and therefore we are able to do a calculation of saying that that 27,500 has a present value using the simple interest proposition of this calculated amount be careful, it's not the usual 3 months, or not that is usual, it's just often the case that the accrual period is 3 months. In this case we have a 4-month period. That is an important point to notice, and that allows us to calculate that that present value there, which is a positive amount, is 26,917. And because we are taking the point of view of a long, that is our original point of view, don't be distracted by the short. It is simply a notional what if exercise. What if the long were to close out that particular position, they would have to take out a short, and that plus tells us that that is again positive to the long. And that is FRA valuation.